The silence in Chief Benson Anakum's massive Lagos parlor was almost deafening as his daughter, Ogechi Anakum, sat completely alone. Her gaze was locked onto the polished glass coffee table before her, but her mind was miles away. To any outsider, she was a girl who had it all: the plush leather chairs, the heavy damask curtains, and marble floors that gleamed like still water. Framed photographs on the wall showed her father smiling alongside governors and senators, showcasing their immense wealth. If you and I were to walk in, we might think she lived a charmed life. But that was her curse. People only saw the glittering cage, completely blind to the lonely girl trapped inside. Commanding and firm, Chief Anakum's love for his only daughter was undeniable, but it always felt more like a set of business instructions than affection. He stood tall in the room, clearing his throat before laying out his plans. "Ogechi, we must discuss your future," he announced, ignoring her soft sigh. He explained that he had already made arrangements with his old friend, Chief Nuosu, whose son Boma had just returned from studying abroad. The chief insisted that this young man was responsible, highly educated, and from an immaculate background. When Ogechi groaned and asked if this was just another arranged blind date, her father frowned, warning her not to dismiss such a golden opportunity. "Call it whatever you want, but this is an arranged marriage meeting," Ogechi protested, her voice rising in quiet rebellion against his demands. Her father argued that she needed to know the young man first, but she refused to be packaged and delivered like cargo. To him, marriage was a duty, a strategic alliance where family background and legacy outweighed trivial emotions. "You will thank me one day," the chief insisted, repeating his favorite line whenever he wanted to shut down her arguments. But before the argument could escalate any further, the heavy wooden door swung open, and in walked Mama Ngozi, the chief's formidable elder sister, ready to join the fray. Though she had her own place across town, Mama Ngozi practically lived at the Anukam estate, injecting herself into everyone's business. She was notoriously loud, sharp-tongued, and always armed with unsolicited advice. Having overheard the entire argument from the hallway, she marched in with her hands on her hips, instantly siding with her brother. "What is your problem this time, Ogechi?" she scolded, looking at her niece with deep disapproval. "Many girls are fasting and praying for a connection like this. Yet you sit here squeezing your face like you are being sent to prison." Ogechi sighed deeply, reiterating that she simply did not want another forced setup. "You call it an arranged meeting as if it is a crime," Mama Ngozi scoffed, waving her hand dismissively at Ogechi's modern complaints. She reminded her niece that in the old days, women did not even see their husbands until the wedding day, accusing the youth of wanting love to fall from the sky like rain. Ogechi tried to explain that times had changed, that she merely wanted the freedom to choose her own partner and build genuine understanding. But her aunt laughed bitterly, mocking her ideas. "Choose? Is marriage a game to you?" Mama Ngozi warned, pointing out that Ogechi's pride would eventually leave her alone, regardless of her beauty or her father's massive wealth. Defending herself quietly, Ogechi reminded her aunt that she was still young, but Mama Ngozi quickly countered that opportunities do not wait forever. Looking between her father and her aunt, Ogechi felt the air leave the room, as if the walls of the mansion were closing in on her. They saw her as a privileged girl, but she felt like a prisoner. "Fine, I will go," she muttered, causing her father to relax and her aunt to smile in triumph. But Ogechi's flat tone held a secret promise. She agreed to meet Boma, but she never promised to be on her best behavior. And already, a plan to ruin the entire date was forming in her mind. Across town that very evening, a remarkably similar battle of wills was unfolding inside another luxurious estate belonging to the Nuosu family. Boma Nuosu, the quiet and serious-minded only son of the proud businessman Chief Raymond Nuosu, stood with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his jaw clenched in frustration. Having grown up in immense wealth, Boma felt that money was not a tool for freedom, but rather a heavy chain of high expectations. From his plush leather armchair, Chief Nwosu watched his son with weary but unyielding eyes, commanding him to attend the meeting the next day. Boma protested, but his father pointed out that he had not even given the girl a single chance. "Exactly. I do not know her, and that is why I refuse to go," Boma shot back, his voice tight but controlled. He resented the idea of treating a complete stranger as his future bride, simply because of a business friendship between their fathers. His father warned him to watch his tone, prompting Boma to clarify that he meant no disrespect, but wanted to make his own choice. Sitting gracefully beside her husband, Mrs. Nwosu decided to intervene. Elegant, poised, and fiercely protective of the family name, she looked at her son gently. "Boma, Ogechi Anukam is from a wonderful home, highly educated and polite. What exactly is your issue with this?" she asked. If we look closer at his frustration, Boma's issue was simple. Nobody cared about what he actually wanted. He dreamed of finding a woman who would love him for who he was, completely detached from his family name, wealth, or business connections. But his father dismissed this as childish fantasy, dryly stating that poverty is not a romantic movie. Boma's jaw clenched at the remark, but his mother quickly chimed in, assuring him that they were not asking him to marry into poverty, but merely to meet a decent girl. Boma knew the truth, though. She was only being pushed because her father was a valuable business asset. Staring at his parents, Boma felt a wave of cold anger rise in his chest as he realized how little his feelings mattered to them. In their eyes, Ogechi Anukam was a perfect transaction, but to Boma, she was an unwanted obligation wrapped in a fancy ribbon. "Fine, I will go," he finally muttered, giving in to the pressure. Mrs. Nwosu sighed with relief, while Chief Nwosu nodded with cold satisfaction. The chief had spent his whole life building a fortress of pride under the guise of family protection, never realizing that his rigid control was slowly alienating the very son he claimed to be protecting from the realities of life. Even though he had never laid eyes on Ogechi Anukam, Boma had already built a deep resentment toward her in his mind. He envisioned her as a spoiled, superficial rich girl who only cared about social media, flashing cameras, and looking down on those with less privilege. Little did he know, Ogechi was harboring the exact same bitter feelings toward him without even knowing what he looked like. Fate was pushing these two stubborn souls toward the very same table, both fully prepared to despise one another. Seeking an escape from her frustration, Ogechi dialed her best friend, Amaka, who picked up almost instantly on the second ring. As Ogechi's absolute closest confidant since their university days, Amaka was known for her brutal honesty and her complete indifference to wealthy lifestyles. The moment she heard Ogechi's voice, she knew something was wrong. "What happened? You sound like trouble," Amaka noted, prompting Ogechi to reveal that her father had arranged yet another match. When Ogechi named Boma Nwosu, Amaka recognized the prominent family name immediately. "Of course, they would never set you up with someone ordinary," Ogechi sighed in exhaustion. She confessed how incredibly tired she was of suitors who only approached her because of her father's immense status. "I am completely sick of sitting across from men who study my father's bank accounts before they even bother to know my heart," Ogechi poured out, her voice trembling. She explained how these suitors always put on perfect smiles and acted humble, only to start plotting corporate mergers and family empires the moment they felt secure. Nobody ever paused to ask if she was actually happy. When Amaka asked what she planned to do, Ogechi declared her intention to make this date fail spectacularly. Her master plan was simple yet wild. She would attend the date dressed as a lowly cleaner. Silence stretched over the phone line before Amaka begged her to say she was joking. Insisting on her wild scheme, Ogechi confirmed that she was absolutely serious about posing as a cleaner. She wanted to strip away the shield of her family name and see how Boma treated someone he assumed was a nobody. "If he insults me, I will know his true, arrogant character," Ogechi explained, adding that if he ignored her entirely, he was just like all the rest. Amaka quietly asked what would happen if he actually turned out to be kind, which made Ogechi pause, a rare moment of doubt washing over her. Amaka warned her that if he was genuinely good, her lie would make things incredibly complicated, but Ogechi was too stubborn to back down now. "My goal is not to hurt anyone. I just want to discover who he really is." Ogechi defended herself, desperately searching for a way to justify her actions. Amaka sighed, warning her that such noble intentions usually end in absolute chaos, pointing out that truth rarely reveals itself through deception. Even though Ogechi understood the risks, she insisted this was her only option. Reluctantly, Amaka agreed to help her source the outfit. By the following afternoon, Amaka delivered a faded, oversized cleaner's uniform. Ogechi slowly stripped away her expensive gold earrings, her heavy designer watch, and her diamonds, leaving her bare and vulnerable. After thoroughly wiping away her makeup, Ogechi scraped her hair back into a tight, simple bun, stripping herself of any luxury. As she stood before the mirror, the expensive, polished facade she usually presented to the high society world slipped away like silk. For so long, she had viewed love as a fortress built brick by brick. But looking at her reflection, she realized she was opening a fragile window. No more rich girl disguise remained. The woman staring back at her in the mirror was almost a complete stranger, barefaced, plain, and entirely disconnected from the famous Anukam name and fortune. Completely gone was the typical high-class glow, replaced by a plain blue uniform and a cheap, worn handbag that had seen better days. Amaka watched her in disbelief, reminding her that she could still call off this crazy plan, but Ogechi was resolute. She wanted to see Boma's true face, entirely unaware that Boma was busy hatching a secret plan of his very own. That night, Boma lay awake in his bed, his father's harsh words about poverty ringing in his ears. Still burning with deep frustration, he resolved that if he went to this meeting as a wealthy heir, he would only ever see a performance. Deep down, Boma knew with absolute certainty that if he arrived as the wealthy Nuosu heir, everyone in that restaurant would put on a fake act. Determined to find the raw truth, he snatched his phone off the nightstand and dialed his loyal personal assistant, Musa. Musa was not just an employee. He was a fiercely loyal, naturally funny friend who was always ready to help Boma, no matter how stressful the task. "Oga Boma, why are you calling me at this late hour? I hope there is no problem," Musa answered warily. Boma smiled, telling him to relax because nobody had died, though Musa knew better than to trust his boss's calm voice. "Let us see how this crazy plan unfolds, shall we?" The plan was as crazy as it was calculated, beginning with a simple, unbelievable demand. Boma, a billionaire's son from a wealthy family, wanted his driver Musa to dress up and take his place on a high-stakes blind date. Musa was terrified, pointing out that even the simple act of drinking water would betray his humble background. While Boma's world was defined by endless wealth, Musa's daily life was about survival and street-side wisdom. All Musa had to do was sit, make small talk, and observe the girl, while Boma watched from the shadows, disguised as a security guard. You and I can already see how this dangerous game of deception was bound to spin out of control. Boma was determined to observe the girl's true character from afar, convinced that her pride would show the moment she thought she was dealing with ordinary people. When Musa gently asked what would happen if she turned out to be genuinely kind, Boma's expression hardened, his heart heavy with cynical assumptions. He firmly believed that rich girls only showed respect to their own class, dismissively claiming he did not need to meet her to know her type. Musa tried to show him the hypocrisy of his ways, pointing out how much Boma hated being judged solely for his family name. But Boma shut the conversation down. He simply promised to send over a sharp designer suit and a clean pair of shoes to complete the disguise. Musa joked that wearing his own worn-out shoes would ruin the Nwosu family reputation before he could even utter a single word of greeting. Though Boma laughed at the joke, his thoughts were already racing toward the upcoming trial, his mind locked on testing this mysterious girl named Ogechi. He felt completely in control of the narrative, entirely unaware that Ogechi was a step ahead of him. She had her own suspicions about wealthy, spoiled suitors, and was currently setting up her own clever trap to see if he was genuine. Both of them were heading into the evening with secrets, each believing they were the one holding all the cards. A sense of quiet opulence filled the luxury hotel lounge in Victoria Island as evening approached, perfectly set up for the secret meeting. Warm amber lighting washed over wide, plush chairs, while fresh roses sat on tables and soft jazz drifted through the air. The waiters carried themselves with practiced, nervous elegance, knowing that the city's elites were about to walk through the doors. Outside the entrance, the head of security, a tough veteran named Yakubu, stood with his shoulders back and eyes scanning the perimeter. He knew from his years of guarding the rich that high society people always revealed their true colors if you watched them closely. And he warned his boys to stay sharp and look professional. The guards saluted their leader just as Boma strolled into the lobby wearing a borrowed security uniform. Thanks to Musa's connections, he had secured the clothes, but the disguise was far from convincing. His sharp haircut, expensive silver watch, and polished leather boots screamed luxury, completely betraying his attempt to look like a low-wage worker. You and I can see how his wealthy posture immediately raised flags for Yakubu, who quickly stopped him. When Boma claimed that Mr. Femi from administration had sent him, the veteran officer warned him that his excessive confidence was dangerous for a rookie, ordering him to stand by the entrance and keep his mouth shut. Boma quietly took his post by the double doors, leaving Yakubu with a lingering sense of suspicion that he simply did not have time to explore. Moments later, a sleek black car pulled up and Musa stepped out, wearing a designer suit worth millions of naira. The tailored fabric hung well on his frame, but his rigid shoulders and nervous fidgeting showed he felt entirely out of place. He kept pulling at his collar, as if the expensive silk was slowly suffocating him, desperately whispering a prayer to himself to remain calm and not ruin the play. The hostess greeted him warmly, completely fooled by the outfit, and guided the trembling young man to the prime, reserved table. The waiter pulled out a chair and gestured for the nervous guest to sit down, offering a list of premium drinks. Musa, trying to sound sophisticated, loudly ordered champagne, only to point at an entry that the waiter politely identified as simple sparkling water. Flustered, Musa quickly lied and claimed he was just testing the staff's knowledge, oblivious to the fact that Boma was watching from across the room, biting his lip to keep from laughing. Meanwhile, Ogechi was slipping through the hotel's rear doors, dressed in a faded cleaner's uniform. She was immediately met with a harsh reprimand from the supervisor, who ordered her to stop apologizing for being late and start mopping near the VIP section. The supervisor barked out a list of strict rules, warning the new girl to move quickly because the luxury lounge had no room for slow workers. Ogechi kept her head down, but the harsh, demeaning tone wounded her pride and opened her eyes to a painful reality. These people only saw a nameless cleaner, completely unaware of her father's massive wealth and her own high standing in society. And their basic human kindness vanished because they deemed her unimportant. She quietly wheeled her plastic bucket into the main dining room, keeping her focus on the floor. Nearby, Musa was still struggling at his table, overcompensating with loud gestures and stiff postures that he had only ever seen in movies. Musa tried desperately to look regal, crossing his leg unnaturally high and nodding grandly at wealthy strangers who completely ignored him. From a distance, Ogechi watched the display, convinced that this flashy, anxious man sitting at the reserved table was her billionaire match, Boma Nwosu. She quietly pushed her mop closer to get a better look, but her concentration was broken when an arrogant customer violently collided with her. The impact sent dirty, soapy water splashing over the bucket, a few drops landing on the man's expensive leather loafers. Instead of apologizing, the furious man turned on her, shouting insults and demanding to know if she was blind. The angry customer continued to shout, loudly complaining that the hotel was hiring incompetent people who did not know their place in life. Standing near the entrance, Boma felt his anger rising as he watched the public humiliation, hoping the scene would end naturally. When the bully refused to stop and began waving his hands near Ogechi's face, Boma decided he had seen enough and stepped forward to intervene. He calmly pointed out that the lady had already apologized and that the man had actually walked right into her path. The customer sneered at his security uniform, mockingly telling him to stay out of business that did not concern a low-level guard. The wealthy man demanded to know if Boma had any idea who he was dealing with, but the young billionaire in disguise remained entirely unfazed. Sensing that other wealthy guests were starting to stare, the angry man spat out a final warning, straightened his jacket, and walked away in a huff. If you and I were in Ogechi's shoes, we would also feel a profound sense of shock at this sudden rescue. She stared at the handsome guard, deeply moved that he had risked his job to defend a common cleaner. When she softly thanked him, Boma shrugged it off as merely stating the truth, unaware that his quiet integrity had just unlocked a door to her heart. A silent, profound connection hung in the air as they stood face to face, both hiding behind identities that did not belong to them. Ogechi broke the intense eye contact first, turning her attention back to her cleaning bucket with a racing pulse. Boma walked back to his station by the door, though he could not resist stealing one more glance at the mysterious cleaner who carried herself with such quiet grace. Meanwhile, Musa sat at the VIP table, sweating in his tight suit as he waited for his wealthy date to arrive. He was completely oblivious to the entrance of Kemi, Ogechi's stunning but deeply envious cousin, who was stepping into the lounge with a hidden agenda. Growing up in Ogechi's shadow had left Kemi with a bitter heart, as she was tired of hearing praise for her cousin's beauty and inheritance. Eager to see what kind of wealthy man Ogechi was supposed to marry, she had crashed the date, determined to size up the billionaire heir for herself. As she strutted toward the VIP area in a brilliant designer dress, Musa sat up straight, convinced that this glamorous woman was his wealthy match. Kemi took in his expensive suit and the attentive waiters, instantly assuming this nervous young man was the legendary Boma. She offered a sweet, calculated smile as she introduced herself, and he eagerly pulled out a chair for her. Although Musa's awkward posture seemed strange to Kemi, she brushed it off, knowing that eccentric billionaires often acted a bit unusual. She apologized for her slight delay, and Musa, trying to sound deep, muttered that waiting was a natural part of existence, before quickly correcting his awkward tone. Just a few feet away, Ogechi was quietly wiping down a table, her focus entirely locked on their conversation as she listened to every word. Kemi leaned in close, cryptically stating that she was very close to Ogechi, which Musa completely misunderstood as his date talking about herself in the third person. He nodded eagerly, urging her to speak her mind. Kemi lost no time in painting a terrible picture of her cousin, calling Ogechi a spoiled, stubborn, and highly difficult girl who always got her way. As we watch this unfold, we can see how easily Musa fell into the trap, leaning back in his chair to play the role of an arrogant, demanding billionaire. He declared that a high society man like himself had no time to chase proud women, and had plenty of other options waiting for him in Lagos. Listening from the shadows, Ogechi felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. Her chest tightened with a strange sense of relief, glad that her little experiment had so quickly exposed this man's shallow, arrogant heart. The girl felt a sense of vindication as she realized the famous Boma Nwosu was nothing more than a superficial, self-absorbed snob. Believing her mission was complete, Ogechi quietly wrung out her cleaning cloth, maintaining her disguise as she swept the floor without showing any outward emotion. However, near the lobby entrance, the real Boma was studying her every move, noticing the sudden sadness that crossed her face as Musa spoke. He felt a strange pang of curiosity, wondering why a common hotel cleaner would care so much about a conversation between wealthy strangers. None of them realized how tangled their web of lies had actually become as the night wore on. Standing rigidly in his oversized security shirt, Boma remained entirely convinced that he was the master puppeteer of the evening. The dinner eventually wrapped up in total confusion, with none of the players realizing how deeply they had been deceived by one another. When the supervisor dismissed Ogechi for the night, she gladly left her cleaning supplies behind and walked out into the cool night air. Her mind was racing with thoughts of the arrogant man at the table who had so easily listened to Kemi's lies without defense. For Ogechi, the blind date was an absolute disaster, confirming every negative assumption she had ever held about wealthy, high-society suitors. A lingering memory of the courageous security guard continued to echo in Ogechi's mind, casting a shadow over her frustration. As she walked toward the exit, the cheap strap of her slipper suddenly snapped, causing her foot to slide dangerously on the polished marble tile. She gasped as she lost her balance, but before she could crash onto the hard ground, a pair of strong hands caught her securely by the waist. Looking up with a racing heart, she found herself staring directly into the eyes of the very guard who had defended her hours earlier. As we leave them standing under the dim lights, you and I can only wonder how this small touch will shatter their illusions. The sudden snap of the plastic strap echoed softly against the concrete, and he immediately stepped forward, his eyes filled with genuine concern as he asked if she was hurt. She quickly shook her head, explaining that her cheap slipper had simply cut, though the embarrassment in her voice was hard to hide. He shook his head, pointing out that she couldn't possibly walk far in that state, but her pride flared up as she insisted she would manage. You and I know that people only say they will manage when they truly have no other choice. It was a classic defense mechanism, born of having her back against the wall with absolutely no one else to rely on in that moment. He knelt down without hesitation, carefully fixing the strap of her broken slipper before telling her to try walking on it now. She took a tentative step, realizing it felt stable, and offered a soft nod of relief. When he asked for her name, she panicked, blurting out Chioma, the very first name that flashed through her mind. Boma smiled, introducing himself as a security guard, which prompted her to ask if he actually liked his job. His answer was profound, explaining that the position taught him how people truly behave when they believe you are completely invisible, useless, and have absolutely nothing of value to offer them. With a quiet sigh, she observed that people's behavior shifts dramatically the moment they assume you have nothing to your name. He agreed, noting that his long hours at the gate gave him endless time to study human nature, prompting her to realize she had stayed too long. After assuring him she would be fine, she began her slow, careful walk toward the exit. Boma stood there, his eyes locked on her receding figure, until she disappeared past the staff gate, unable to shake the feeling that there was something deeply intriguing about this girl. Meanwhile, that night, Chief Benson Anukam sat in his lavish parlor, his face dark with shame as he got word that the arranged blind date had been an utter disaster. An incredibly tense phone call from Chief Enzi Osu had left the wealthy older man feeling deeply unsettled and defensive. Back at his residence, his daughter Ogechi was facing his fiery interrogation, explaining that she had indeed met the young man, but found him completely unserious. She detailed how he carried himself with an insufferable arrogance, speaking as though women were lining up to beg for his attention, rather than showing any readiness for a real relationship. When her father pressed her, asking if she had even approached the meeting with an open mind, Ogechi defended herself, reminding him that she had fulfilled his request by going there, even if the match was a terrible mistake. Her father demanded to know if she had actually behaved herself, immediately causing Ogechi to snap back, asking why every failure had to be blamed on her. Chief Benson sighed, telling her he knew her quiet tactics of making things fail without ever raising her voice. She looked away, secretly admitting to herself that his accusation held some truth, which only made her defense more difficult. She firmly told him she could never marry an arrogant man just to please his old friend, leaving her father to stew in his embarrassment. Meanwhile, across town in the grand mansion of Chief Nuzeo-su, their son, Boma, was facing an equally intense interrogation from his own disappointed parents. A heavy silence filled the room as Chief Nzeo-su glared at his son, while his wife sat beside him, her face etched with deep maternal anxiety. The chief accused Boma of not giving the young woman a proper chance, but Boma coldly replied that he had seen more than enough to confirm his doubts. He openly declared that arranged marriages were a complete sham, ignoring his father's angry commands to stop acting like a spoiled child. Boma argued that he deserved a choice in his own future, growing tired of his mother's reminders about Ogechi's sterling family background. He wondered aloud why everyone cared so much about prestige, but completely ignored the character of the woman herself. The resolute patriarch declared that a second meeting would be arranged, leaving Boma staring at him in utter disbelief. Chief Nzeo-su made it clear there would be no chaotic hotel dates this time. Instead, they would host a formal gathering at one of their family estates with both sets of parents present. Boma scoffed, realizing they were trying to force a connection rather than letting it die. But his father made it clear that family honor was non-negotiable. 2 separate households, 2 fierce battles, and 2 stubborn fathers who refused to back down. Yet, beneath all the fiery defiance, both young souls were privately dreaming of a completely different person who had touched their hearts. Deep down, they both longed for a simple connection, free from the heavy burdens of family wealth and calculated expectations. As the storm of their parents' anger raged around them, both Ogechi and Boma remained lost in their own private thoughts, fixated on the brief encounters they had shared at the hotel. Ogechi could not forget the gentle touch of the security guard who had caught her so selflessly when she stumbled. At the same time, Boma was haunted by the image of the weary, soft-spoken cleaner who had thanked him with such genuine gratitude. Later, when Ogechi's phone rang and her friend Amaka asked how the dreaded date had gone, Ogechi quietly admitted it was a total failure. A spark of excitement entered Ogechi's voice as she confessed that she had actually met someone else during her disastrous trip to the hotel. Amaka gasped in disbelief when she heard it was a lowly security guard, prompting Ogechi to quickly defend her feelings. She explained how the guard had stepped up to help her twice, first shielding her from a rude, obnoxious guest, and later rescuing her when her slipper broke. Amaka went silent, processing the strange news, as Ogechi wistfully noted that he had helped her without knowing her status or her family name. When Amaka warned her that she was getting too deep into a dangerous lie, Ogechi stubbornly insisted she only wanted to show gratitude. Determined to find any excuse to see him, Ogechi claimed she simply needed to express her appreciation to him one more time. Amaka saw right through her, flatly pointing out that Ogechi didn't even believe her own words, so there was no reason anyone else should. Ogechi softly admitted she was confused, but insisted that the young man felt entirely real and honest in a world full of fake smiles. Amaka warned her not to play with his emotions, reminding her that she had already started this connection on a foundation of lies. Those words weighed heavily on her mind, but by the following afternoon, she still dressed in very plain clothes and found herself walking right back to the hotel gates. A flicker of surprise lit up Boma's face when he saw her appear, prompting him to tease her about returning so soon. She tried to play it cool, claiming she was just passing by, but he playfully questioned why anyone would casually stroll through a secure hotel staff gate. Smiling, she finally admitted she had come specifically to see him, a confession that made his heart skip a beat. They walked away from the noisy, bustling entrance, finding a quiet, shaded side road where they could talk without the constant pressure of the world. As you and I watched them open up, they both shared that their family dynamics were incredibly complicated, bound tightly by the suffocating plans of others. She explained with a wry smile that her family firmly believed love should simply obey their strict instructions. Boma laughed in agreement, sensing the deep irony, though neither of them dared to reveal the full scope of their wealthy backgrounds. They were sharing genuine emotions while hiding behind false identities, creating a bizarre connection where lies somehow brought them closer to the truth. Later, they sat together, sharing a very simple, cheap roadside drink. Yet the humble moment touched Ogechi far more than any extravagant date ever had. She was used to men buying her expensive dinners and lavish gifts, but those always felt like a transaction, whereas this felt real. Unlike all those transactional dates, this simple afternoon felt incredibly pure and meaningful to her. When she thanked him yet again, Boma playfully teased her for being overly grateful, while she countered that he had a habit of brushing off his own kindness as if it were nothing. They sat side by side on a low concrete curb beneath the shade of a vendor's umbrella, enjoying a rare moment of absolute peace. However, Boma decided to subtly test her, wanting to see if this girl named Chioma possessed a truly compassionate heart. He feigned worry, claiming his mother was ill and that mounting hospital bills were the real reason he worked so hard, despite how society looked down on guards. He quietly noted that a man simply has to do whatever it takes to provide for his family in hard times. Ogechi listened with deep empathy, acknowledging how difficult that must be, but he shrugged it off as just another part of life. Moving on instinct, she reached into her bag and pulled out some money, gently offering it to help cover his mother's medical expenses. Boma immediately refused, explaining that he hadn't shared his troubles to solicit money from a struggling cleaner who likely had her own burdens. He insisted that as a man, he would find a way, causing Ogechi to slowly lower her hand as she realized how much she respected his pride and integrity. Unbeknownst to him, Ogechi had also been conducting her own silent test during their emotional exchange. She had carefully watched his eyes, wanting to see if he would eagerly snatch the cash, display greed, or act as though he was entitled to her help. His firm, polite refusal spoke volumes, instantly elevating him in her estimation and earning her profound respect. When she thanked him once more, Boma looked confused, asking what she was thanking him for since he hadn't accepted the money. She softly explained that he had refused to make her feel insignificant, prompting him to gently assure her that she was anything but small, as a deep, loaded silence fell over them. Following her quiet afternoon with Boma, Ogechi walked back to her privileged world with a remarkably peaceful heart. Absolutely nothing monumental had occurred between them. They had simply shared cheap drinks and honest conversation on a dusty curb. Yet, for the very first time in years, she felt truly seen as a human being, rather than being analyzed like a prize. What she did not realize was that their peaceful rendezvous had not gone entirely unnoticed by her social circle. Kemi had been driving past when she spotted the unmistakable figure of Ogechi Anukum, dressed down and laughing with a security guard. Kemi's eyes narrowed with suspicion as she realized she had stumbled upon a juicy secret. A surprise visit from Femi Adewale the following afternoon brought a temporary distraction to the tense Anukam household. Femi, the polished heir of a massively wealthy family, had spent months trying to worm his way into Ogechi's life with his charm and expensive tailoring. He was incredibly adept at playing the dutiful, respectful young man whenever elders were around, though Ogechi always saw through his facade. Chief Benson welcomed him with open arms, eager for any potential suitor who came from a suitable background. Femi sat down smoothly, offering his polite respects before carefully steering the conversation toward Ogechi, claiming he was deeply concerned about her welfare. With a concerned sigh, Femi remarked that he had heard whispers of Ogechi not acting like her usual self lately. Chief Benson groaned, complaining that his daughter had simply become too difficult to manage in her stubbornness. Femi quickly played the diplomat, suggesting that young people rarely recognize what is truly good for them until they lose it completely. He poured on the charm, expressing his immense respect for their family and his desire to treat Ogechi like royalty if she would only give him a chance. Chief Benson nodded, completely won over by the young man's smooth promises, just as Ogechi walked into the room, her expression instantly turning cold at the sight of them. She offered a flat, dry "thank you" before attempting to excuse herself, but her father quickly made his exit to force them together. Once they were left completely alone, Femi's polite, respectful smile vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, demanding stare. He accused her of avoiding him, but Ogechi bluntly corrected him, stating that she wasn't avoiding him, she simply had absolutely zero interest. Femi sneered, warning her that she was embarrassing her father by continuously rejecting highly eligible suitors. She countered that a man's goodness isn't defined by his own boasts, completely dismissing his complaints about waiting for her by reminding him she had never asked him to. With a sharp smirk, she retorted that the day he finally stopped waiting would be a highly peaceful day for both of them. Femi bristled, claiming she only dared to speak so arrogantly because of her father's massive wealth and social standing. Ogechi stood her ground, explaining she only spoke this way because he utterly refused to listen to her polite rejections. Femi's tone turned chillingly arrogant as he described himself as the puppet master operating in the shadows of her life, warning her to be careful. As you and I can see, his inflated ego was about to find a dangerous ally when he ran into Kemi, who was eager to spill the scandalous gossip she had witnessed the day before. Kemi could barely hide the malicious glee in her voice as she recounted the shocking scene she had witnessed on the dusty roadside. She described seeing Ogechi chatting with a common security guard, the very same man she had noticed during that disastrous blind date. To her cousin Femi, this piece of gossip was like water to a man dying of thirst in the desert. As Femi gazed back at the grand Nuosu family mansion, the tight, bitter lines on his face finally softened into a cold, calculating grin. He finally had the weapon he needed to ruin her. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Mrs. Nuosu noticed her son Boma was acting strangely, smiling warmly at his phone only to hide it the moment she walked into the room. Boma had taken to leaving the compound in a hurry, offering no explanations to anyone, which eventually aroused his mother's deep suspicion. While Chief Nuosu merely grumbled about it, Mrs. Nuosu decided it was time to uncover the truth. She summoned Musa, their driver and assistant, to the main living room, where the poor man stood shivering with anxiety. She demanded to know if Boma was seeing a woman, but Musa tried to play dumb, stammering about how young men simply had friends. Mrs. Nuosu was not a woman to be trifled with, and her sharp glare made Musa look around the lavishly decorated parlor as if the leather armchairs could magically rescue him from her interrogation. Musa squeezed his eyes shut for a brief moment, silently cursing his own inability to keep a secret under pressure. He lamely claimed he did not know the girl well, but his hesitation only confirmed Mrs. Nuosu's worst fears. Trapped, he admitted the girl was from the luxury hotel, describing her as a calm, respectful woman who had been dressed like a cleaner. The word cleaner hung in the air like a foul odor, sending a wave of absolute horror through the wealthy matriarch. Musa instantly regretted his loose tongue, trying desperately to backtrack and clarify that he did not mean they were actually dating. But the damage was already done, and her rage was building. The fragile peace of the household shattered completely that evening when Mrs. Nuosu marched into her son's quarters to demand answers. She did not waste time with pleasantries, immediately asking Boma about the cleaner he had been spending his afternoons with. Boma tried to play innocent, but his mother saw right through the defense, accusing him of bringing immense disgrace to their prominent family name. She could not comprehend why her son would reject Ogechi Anukam, a respectable young lady from a wealthy dynasty, only to drag their reputation through the mud by chasing a common hotel worker. To her, it was a display of utter stubbornness and folly. Boma felt a surge of hot anger as he defended a woman his mother had never even met, challenging her elitist views on class and status. He passionately asked if poor people lacked hearts, questioning why a simple cleaner could not be decent, kind, or worthy of love. Mrs. Nwosu looked at him as if he had completely lost his mind. But Boma was simply exhausted by the endless superficiality of their social circle. Let us pause here, because you and I both know how fast gossip travels in these wealthy neighborhoods. Indeed, over at the Anakim residence, the wild rumors about Ogechi's secret roadside meetings reached her father much sooner than she had anticipated. The poisonous whispers started by Kemi had been weaponized by Femi, who twisted the story to make it sound as scandalous as possible. By sunset, Chief Anakim was practically vibrating with rage, summoning his daughter Ogechi into his mahogany-lined study. He demanded to know if she was truly fraternizing with a common gatekeeper, brushing aside her attempts to find out who had betrayed her trust. Ogechi tried to stand her ground, arguing fiercely that a person's profession does not define their basic human value. But her father was a man of cold status, and he absolutely refused to tolerate what he saw as naive, foolish idealism from his child. Chief Anakim sneered at his daughter, accusing her of being a naive rich girl who was foolishly romanticizing the harsh realities of poverty. He warned her with a cold voice that young women who played such games always ended up weeping with regret. But Ogechi did not back down, snapping back that wealthy fathers who tried to control every aspect of their daughters' lives ended up losing them entirely. The sharp silence that followed her words was suffocating, and though she felt a sudden prickle of regret for her disrespect, she stood firm. Her father stared at her, his eyes dark with unspoken anger, before coldly ordering her to leave his sight. A freezing silence settled over the Anakim mansion in the days that followed, transforming their home into a fortress of pride and resentment. They exchanged empty, formal greetings, but the familial warmth that once existed had vanished completely. Seeking an escape from this heavy atmosphere, Ogechi slipped away a few days later to meet Boma, slipping back into her humble disguise as Chioma. As they strolled down a peaceful, quiet road eating roasted corn they bought from a street vendor, Boma noticed her distraction. He gently pointed out that she seemed lost in thought, prompting her to sigh and confess that her family was becoming incredibly difficult. Ogechi explained that the friction at home arose because her parents loved a curated, perfect version of her, rather than who she actually was. She described how they wanted a flawless daughter to parade around high society, one who smiled, obeyed, and married for wealth. Boma nodded quietly, admitting he understood the burden of being used by others for family wealth. However, his slip of the tongue caught him off guard, making Ogechi look at him with sudden curiosity. Sensing his mistake, Boma quickly recovered, laughing off his blunder by claiming that working around wealthy elite had taught him exactly how their spoiled children gossiped. Boma pointed out that rich people easily forgot the hired help was listening, but Ogechi could not shake a growing sense of suspicion. She observed his polished speech and calm, confident posture, which did not belong to a man accustomed to being ordered around. Dismissing it as mere overthinking, she focused back on the walk, unaware that Boma was also quietly studying her behavior. He had noticed how she meticulously chose their walking routes, steered clear of upscale neighborhoods, and never revealed her actual address. When he offered to walk her a bit closer to her home, she quickly declined, insisting she was perfectly fine on her own. Boma reluctantly accepted her boundaries, watching Ogechi walk away until her slender figure vanished around the corner of the busy street. But they were not as alone as they believed, and you and I can see how fate was already preparing to pull back the curtain on their secrets. Across the road, Musa stood in the shadows, paralyzed with disbelief as he watched his boss with a supposed cleaner. Boma had sent him on a simple errand, But seeing the two lovers together made Musa freeze in his tracks. He knew this secret relationship was heading straight toward a massive storm, and he was terrified of the impending fallout. Initially, Musa could only shake his head and smile warmly at the unfolding romance, realizing his boss was completely smitten. He knew Boma was falling deeply in love, even if the stubborn young man refused to admit it to himself. However, later that afternoon, Musa witnessed a shocking sight that completely erased the amused smile from his lips. He had been tasked with delivering some urgent corporate documents to a residence near the prestigious Anukum estate. There, among the towering gates and security detail, he saw something that shattered all his assumptions about Boma's mysterious, humble sweetheart. Musa bolted back to the estate, his mind racing with the realization that they were dealing with extraordinary trouble. He burst into Boma's private room without knocking, gasping for breath as he tried to explain the impossible truth. He blurted out that Chioma was no ordinary hotel cleaner, claiming he had just seen her dressed in expensive designer clothes, stepping into the massive Anukum mansion. Boma scoffed, telling Musa to stop playing ridiculous games, and insisting it must have been a look-alike. But Musa shook his head fiercely, declaring that having seen them together so often, he could never mistake her face. Musa pleaded with his boss, reminding Boma that he had personally picked him up from that hotel and memorized the girl's features. The color drained from Boma's face as the heavy silence of realization settled over the room, leaving him completely speechless. When Musa finally muttered the name Ogechi Anukum, it felt like a physical blow that left Boma reeling with shock and betrayal. He looked away, his mind instantly flooded with a painful mixture of white-hot anger, confusion, and deep hurt. He wondered if she had simply been playing a cruel game, wearing a cleaner's uniform just to test his sincerity. Boma felt his initial anger fade into a bitter sense of irony as he remembered his own deep web of deception. Let us look at this honestly, because you and I can see he was guilty of the exact same crime. He had worn a security guard uniform and fabricated a heartbreaking story about his mother's hospital bills to test her kindness. With what right could he feel betrayed when his own hands were so dirty? Yet the pain in his chest was incredibly real, because his love for her was no longer a game. When Musa quietly asked what he planned to do, Boma replied that he would not confront her just yet. Boma explained that he needed to understand the motive behind her elaborate deception before making his next move. That night, he sat alone in the darkness, staring at his phone screen where her number was saved under the name Chioma. He wondered if he was actually looking at Ogechi's number, feeling a deep ache as he realized their playful game had turned into a painful wound. Across town, Ogechi was also awake, tossing and turning in her luxurious bed while staring at Boma's number. She desperately yearned to hear his voice, but every time she hovered her finger over the call button, paralyzing fear stopped her. Amaka arrived at the mansion the following morning, intending to check on her friend after the drama with her father. The moment she stepped into the bedroom, however, one look at Ogechi's pale, exhausted face told her everything she needed to know. The heavy bags under her eyes and her slumped posture spoke volumes of a long, sleepless night, spent drowning in anxiety and regret. It was clear to Amaka that the web of lies Ogechi had spun was finally beginning to collapse under its own weight, threatening to crush the only genuine connection she had ever made in her life. Amaka sighed deeply, realizing immediately that Ogechi had still not summoned the courage to confess her true identity to Boma. She warned her friend that this dangerous game had gone way too far, shifting from a simple test of character into something much deeper. Now that Ogechi harbored real, intense feelings for Boma, keeping the truth from him was actively poisoning their relationship. Ogechi admitted her terror, weeping that revealing her immense wealth might cause him to abandon her or treat her differently. But Amaka countered gently, reminding her that finding out from a third party would be far more devastating. Ogechi longed to strip away the disguise, wanting nothing more than to hold his hand as her true self, free from the heavy burden of social expectations. Her heart pleaded with her to confess everything immediately, but her overwhelming fear urged her to wait just one more day. Tragically, that single day of hesitation was all the opportunity her rivals needed to strike. Kemi had been keeping a close watch on Ogechi ever since spotting her with Boma, and she wasted no time poking around the luxury hotel. By flashing sweet, fake smiles at the staff, she began digging up the secrets Ogechi had tried so hard to hide. Kemi's persistence paid off when she located an employee who remembered the unusual cleaner working near the VIP table on the day of the blind date. To her absolute delight, another staff member had captured a candid photo in the break room that clearly showed Ogechi in uniform. Kemi's mind raced with bitter memories of always playing second fiddle, remembering how she secretly detested Ogechi's effortless grace at family gatherings. She had spent years smiling beside her in photos, while secretly counting every compliment Ogechi received, harboring a deep resentment that she was now fully prepared to unleash. Kemi eagerly saved the incriminating photo onto her phone before immediately calling Femi to arrange an urgent meeting in the dim light of evening. She had spent her entire life believing she was the superior choice, but seeing Ogechi's downfall within reach felt sweeter than any past victory. When Femi arrived, she gleefully showed him the proof, confirming that Chief Anakum's precious daughter had indeed been masquerading as a hotel cleaner. As they plotted their next move, you and I can feel the impending doom of a secret about to explode. They smiled in the dark, ready to expose her completely to the world. Today, you and I are going to look closely at a plan born out of pure malice. Femi and Kemi were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Kemi wanted to snatch Boma away before Ogechi could truly claim him, whispering to Femi that her only goal was to expose the heiress's flaws. Femi, however, had far darker ambitions. He wanted to humiliate Chief Anakum publicly and force Ogechi to regret ever rejecting him. If the Nuosu family discarded her in the wake of the scandal, it would be a perfect victory. Kemi was driven by bitter jealousy, while Femi was fueled by wounded pride and insatiable greed. Soon, their opportunity arrived when Chief Anakum and Chief Nuosu agreed to hold a lavish family dinner in Lagos, mimicking a formal engagement. The grand dinner was meant to soothe old wounds and bury the embarrassment of that disastrous first blind date. Chief Anukam was determined to patch things up, completely unaware that his daughter had been playing the role of a humble cleaner despite her immense wealth. He warned her to behave, telling her to wipe the scowl off her face and hold her sharp tongue for once. The guests arrived with forced smiles, exchanging polite greetings as Chief Nuosu, Mrs. Nuosu, and Mama Gozi walked into the parlor. Then the double doors opened, and Boma stepped inside. He was no longer dressed in a security guard's faded uniform. He looked exactly like the billionaire's heir they all expected, sharp, handsome, radiating wealth and confidence. The moment Ogechi laid eyes on him, the air rushed out of her lungs and the noisy room fell completely silent. Standing before her was the very same security guard she had grown to care for. It was Boma, her quiet defender. But he was no guard at all. He was Boma Nuosu, the high society heir she had spent weeks trying to avoid. At that exact moment, Boma spotted her too. Even though his assistant Musa had given him a quiet warning, seeing her dressed in designer elegance as Ogechi Anukam sent a shockwave through his chest. The simple girl named Chioma was gone, replaced by a billionaire's daughter. They locked eyes across the crowded room, frozen in absolute shock, unable to move or utter a single word. Surrounded by an eager crowd of relatives and business associates, the two could only communicate through silent, desperate glances. Ogechi's wide eyes screamed a single word of disbelief, asking if he was truly the man behind the uniform. In return, Boma's intense stare answered back with the same shock, confirming that she too had been wearing a mask. The awkward, prolonged silence did not escape Chief Anakim, who cleared his throat to break the tension. He called out to his daughter, telling her to come forward and greet their esteemed guests. Swallowing her pride, Ogechi stepped closer, whispering a stiff "good evening," which Boma returned in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. The chance to pull each other aside and demand answers was lost when Femi made his grand entrance. Chief Anakim's brow furrowed in disapproval at the uninvited guest, but Femi kept his composure, greeting the elders with exaggerated respect and asking if he had arrived too late. The chief reluctantly welcomed him just as Kemi slipped into the room behind him. A heavy wave of dread washed over Ogechi the moment she saw the two of them together. Her instincts were proven right before the first course could even be served. Femi stood up, clearing his throat and addressing Chief Anakim with a fake display of humility, claiming he had an urgent truth that both families deserved to hear. Chief Anakim demanded to know what was so important, his voice dripping with growing impatience. Without a shred of hesitation, Femi declared that Ogechi had been lying to everyone in the room from the very beginning. Ogechi tried to protest, begging him to stop, but Femi was already pulling out his phone. He proudly displayed a photograph to the entire room, showing the billionaire's daughter dressed in a cheap cleaner's uniform at the luxury hotel on the day of her scheduled blind date. The older man stared at the screen in absolute disbelief, his jaw dropping as he turned his gaze to his trembling daughter, whispering her name in a mixture of confusion and rising anger. Kemi quickly chimed in to seal the trap, confirming that she too had witnessed Ogechi lurking around the hotel lobby, dressed as a maid to spy on her date. Chief Anakim's face turned crimson with shame as he asked what kind of childish game his daughter was playing. Ogechi's throat went dry, her voice cracking as she tried to explain, but her father cut her off, accusing her of dragging the family name through the mud. Femi sneered, claiming she only did it to test people and act superior. Seeing her distress, Boma stepped forward and demanded they stop. Femi turned on him with a cold grin, warning Boma not to defend her too quickly, while Kemi's eyes locked onto Musa, who was backing away. Femi pointed a finger at Boma, loudly proclaiming that he was defending Ogechi because he was also hiding a massive secret. He revealed that Musa, who was standing quietly in the corner, was the one who had actually sat at the VIP table, pretending to be the wealthy heir. Chief Nuosu turned to his assistant in shock, demanding to know if this was true, prompting a terrified apology from Musa. When the older man confronted his son, Boma admitted to the deception, stating he was forced into a corner by his father's demands. The dining room erupted into chaos as both patriarchs realized they had been fooled, each accusing the other's child of bringing ultimate shame to their proud families. Standing in the center of the storm, Ogechi felt the crushing weight of humiliation, anger, and deep betrayal. Boma tried to lock eyes with her, but she averted her gaze, unable to face him now that their secrets had been laid bare. The bitter truth was finally out in the open, proving that they were not just innocent victims of an arranged marriage, they were both liars. Chief Anakim's booming voice suddenly shattered the shouting match, ordering everyone to be quiet. He glared at his daughter and told her to get out of his sight. Without saying a word to defend herself, Ogechi turned and ran out of the house, with Boma slipping out the door right behind her before anyone could react. Out in the cool night air, Ogechi spun around and demanded to know why Boma had lied to her. Boma scoffed, asking if she really had the right to question his honesty. He explained that he only wanted to be free, to discover who he was, away from his family's wealth, and to see if she would treat an ordinary security guard with respect. Ogechi felt insulted, accusing him of treating her like a scientific experiment. She pointed out that he let her believe he was living in poverty, but Boma countered that she had done the exact same thing to him. Both admitted they were terrified of being used, but Boma noted that her prejudice prevented her from ever giving him a genuine chance. Ogechi shot back, asking if Boma had given her a fair chance either, which caused a heavy silence to fall over them. They stood there in the dark, both consumed by anger, deep pain, and the bitter taste of mutual guilt. Boma was the first to let his defenses down, his voice softening as he confessed that, even though they met under false pretenses, his feelings for her were completely genuine. Ogechi shook her head, tears welling in her eyes, as she whispered that even if his feelings were real, they were built entirely on a foundation of lies. Confused and overwhelmed, she told him she did not know what to believe anymore, refusing to talk any further before turning away from him. Boma pleaded with her, suggesting they drop the masks and just hold hands as their true selves, arguing they were never defined by their family names. But Ogechi could only picture him as the deceitful heir who had played her for a fool. By the next morning, a suffocating silence hung over her family home. The disastrous dinner had ended with forced, frosty farewells, and the gossip was already spreading like wildfire through the high society circles of Lagos. Chief Anukam was absolutely furious, locking himself in his private study and refusing to eat. He grumbled to his trusted assistant Benson about the immense shame and how his phone had not stopped ringing with mocking inquiries. Chief Anukam had spent his entire life building a reputation of pure steel, hiding behind walls of immense pride under the guise of protecting his legacy. When Ogechi finally gathered the courage to face him, his anger exploded. He yelled at her for making a complete mockery of their name, asking how a billionaire's sole heiress could lower herself to dress like a common housemaid. Ogechi pleaded, crying that she never intended to bring him shame, but the proud patriarch would not hear it. He barked that she had ruined his reputation, pointing out that Boma's behavior was just as repulsive. He questioned what kind of low-class family they were almost forced to unite with. An urge to defend Boma rose in Ogechi's chest, but she quickly suppressed it, having zero strength left to engage in another shouting match. Meanwhile, across town at the Nuosu mansion, Chief Nuosu was delivering a nearly identical lecture to his own son. He ranted that Ogechi's childish antics were completely unacceptable, but turned his anger back onto Boma, refusing to let him play the victim. He demanded to know how Boma could think he was innocent after dressing up as a security guard while forcing Musa to play his part. The furious chief declared that the arranged marriage was officially over, determined to end the alliance before any more public humiliation could follow. Now, you and I can see exactly how Femi seized this perfect opportunity to strike. Just 2 days after the disastrous dinner, Femi arrived at Chief Anukam's estate, dressed in an immaculate agbada and carrying himself like a savior. He offered his deepest condolences for the family's embarrassment, smoothly suggesting that while Ogechi was a wonderful woman, she clearly lacked a mature partner to protect her public image. He looked the chief in the eye, claiming he cared deeply for Ogechi and their family legacy, promising he would never let anyone mock her again. Behind the scenes, Kemi quietly backed his play, whispering to the family that Ogechi desperately needed a stable man to bring her back to reality. Kemi kept pressing Ogechi's aunt, arguing that Femi was a stable, serious man from a highly respected family. As these whispers reached Ogechi, a suffocating feeling of being trapped began to take hold of her. First, her father had tried to force her to marry Boma, and now, because of this public scandal, Femi was being pushed onto her as the ultimate solution. But Ogechi was far too clever to fall for his act. She knew Femi didn't love her, but merely coveted her wealth and status to elevate his own power. Across town, Boma was dealing with his own family pressure, sitting in pitch darkness when his mother entered his room, coldly advising him to forget about the Anukam girl. His mother argued that the entire situation had brought nothing but disgrace, pointing out that while both youngsters made foolish errors, it was clear this alliance was not worth the pain. She urged him to move on, reminding him of his youth, but Boma firmly declared his love for Ogechi and his absolute exhaustion with his parents controlling his destiny. He ignored her protests of parental love, standing up to stare out the window as he admitted that trying to forget her had already proven impossible. He was furious with Ogechi's lies, yet his heart clung to the memory of the sweet, humble Chioma, who had sat with him on the dusty roadside, offering genuine kindness without an ounce of pride. Boma's thoughts drifted to how he had truly loved her, not as a wealthy heiress dressed up for some high society gala, but with a quiet, hidden truth that felt entirely right. He had cherished her when he believed she had nothing, and his feelings hadn't changed now that he knew they both owned vast fortunes. Meanwhile, Ogechi was desperately trying to piece together how Femi and Kemi had managed to capture that incriminating photo of her at the hotel. Her loyal friend Amaka came to visit, listening intently before pointing out the obvious truth. Amaka explained that Femi had clearly planned the entire exposure to humiliate her at the dinner before she ever had the chance to explain herself. Ogechi agreed that both Femi and Kemi had conspired against her, convinced that Femi was plotting something even more sinister. When she asked how they could possibly prove his schemes, Amaka suggested they return to the very beginning of the mystery, the luxury hotel. Leaving their wealthy status behind, the two women returned to the venue as ordinary citizens seeking answers. Amaka cornered one of the hotel cleaners whom Ogechi had befriended. The woman trembled with fear, but under gentle questioning, she finally confessed that Kemi had snooped around, asking about the mysterious new maid. Amaka reassured her, explaining they only wanted to know who had paid her to take the photo. The cleaner stammered that Kemi claimed the new maid was her long-lost cousin, but admitted she hadn't come to the hotel alone. While Kemi visited once by herself, she was later spotted outside with a light-skinned, sharp-looking man dressed in an expensive navy blue suit, a perfect description of Femi. As the dark clouds of conspiracy gathered, Amaka dropped another massive bombshell that made Ogechi's blood run cold. She revealed that her uncle, who shared an office floor with Femi's firm, had overheard Femi digging into Chief Anukum's corporate business, desperately asking questions and looking for any weak spots in her father's lucrative multi-billion naira government contracts. From the outside, you and I can see the brutal truth. It was all about leverage. Femi only wanted to see what marrying into the powerful Anukam family would hand him on a silver platter. That was the sole reason he had been sucking up to Chief Anukam, hoping to gain access and absolute control. Ogechi felt a sickening wave of foolishness wash over her. She had never trusted Femi, but watching her father actually listen to his smooth lies cut deep. Later that evening, she marched into the parlor to confront Kemi, who was casually scrolling through her phone. Ogechi demanded a talk, but Kemi feigned ignorance, prompting Ogechi to snap, asking why she was working with an outsider against her own blood. Kemi's eyes flashed with a bitter resentment that had been brewing for years as she spat back her justification. She resented how everyone treated Ogechi like the only precious daughter in the family, the beautiful special one who needed protection and a wealthy match. To Kemi, Ogechi had everything but chose to act unhappy, dressing down and pretending to be poor, while ordinary folks begged for such a life. It was infuriating to watch her reject blessings so casually. Ogechi stood, shocked, realizing for the first time the deep jealousy her cousin carried. Softly, she tried to explain that money cannot cure loneliness, but Kemi was too blinded by envy to hear the truth. While wealth provides comfort and endless options, it never truly allows people to see the real you. It only makes them blind to everything else. Ogechi admitted this quietly, acknowledging her own mistake in lying, but she also called out Kemi's cruelty. Kemi had not exposed the secret out of love, but out of a desperate desire to humiliate her. Finally breaking down, Kemi confessed her deep jealousy, admitting she felt like a shadow next to Ogechi. Ogechi took a deep breath, offering a quiet apology, and listening to her cousin's pain. It was not complete forgiveness, but in that quiet room, a fragile bridge had been built. Over at the Nuosu residence, Boma was struggling to swallow his own bitter medicine. He spent days staring blankly at his office walls until his loyal security man, Musa, could no longer hold his tongue. Musa pointed out the glaring hypocrisy, reminding Boma that he had also hidden his identity while demanding total honesty from Ogechi. They had both judged each other from behind masks, committing the exact same mistake from opposite sides of the social divide. When Boma dryly remarked that Musa was enjoying this blunt truth a bit too much, the loyal worker simply smiled, admitting he was enjoying it just a little. A heavy sigh escaped Boma as the absolute truth of Musa's words finally settled in his chest. He had played a dangerous game, assuming Ogechi would be arrogant because of her wealth, and had even concocted a fake story about his mother's hospital bill just to test her heart. His lies were no better than hers, and he knew that if he wanted her back, he had to swallow his pride and show up as his true self. Meanwhile, Ogechi was weeping in her bedroom, pouring her heart out to her trusted friend Amaka. She felt she had ruined everything, but Amaka gently reminded her that making a mistake is not the end of the road. The guilt ate at Ogechi as she admitted she had delayed telling the truth until the choice was taken from her. Amaka listened patiently, advising her that while some people would indeed try to exploit her wealth, she could not let suspicion run her life. Fear could serve as a temporary shield, but living in constant paranoia would only build a prison around her heart. Ogechi's tears flowed freely as she realized the depth of this truth. She had almost destroyed her connection with the only man who had truly seen her, and the irony was that he had seen her essence while she was masquerading as a humble cleaner. When Boma arrived at the Grand Anukam mansion 2 days later, the air was thick with tension. He greeted Chief Anukam respectfully, stating clearly that he had come to apologize for his actions. The stern elder questioned him, and Boma did not shrink away, offering a sincere apology for disrespecting the family and judging Ogechi beforehand. Ogechi watched him, her breath catching as he turned his gaze toward her without taking a step closer. He openly confessed his bias, admitting he had unfairly assumed her family's wealth made her arrogant, and apologized deeply for letting his assumptions cloud his judgment. His voice held a steady sincerity as he admitted his supposed wisdom had merely been unfair prejudice. Boma spoke of the woman he met disguised as a cleaner, noting she had shown him more genuine respect and kindness than anyone in high society. He acknowledged their mutual lies and the pain he caused, yet he laid his heart bare, declaring his love for Ogechi without demanding anything in return. He made it clear he would not use her father's influence to pressure her. A heavy silence descended on the parlor, leaving even Mama Ngozi speechless. Chief Anukam studied him, surprised to find humble truth instead of pride. Something shifted in Chief Anukam as he finally looked past the security guard uniform and saw the man's character. He pointed out that everyone, including himself, had behaved foolishly by letting pride dictate their actions and trying to force two strangers together. They had all been obsessed with being right, one judging, the other testing. The chief declared that if any relationship were to survive from this wreckage, it would have to be by free choice, not family obligation. Boma agreed quietly, and as Ogechi looked at him, the harsh anger in her eyes softened into a quiet, aching sorrow. Underneath the pain, a spark of affection still lingered, refusing to be snuffed out. Boma had laid his true self bare, and the power of decision now rested entirely in Ogechi's hands. As she stood silently, the tension in the parlor was almost palpable, with her father watching intently and Mama Ngozi uncharacteristically quiet. Ogechi turned to her father first, speaking gently but firmly, reminding him that she was his daughter and not a corporate asset to be negotiated. Her words struck a deep, reflective chord in Chief Anukam, before she turned her attention back to Boma. Addressing Boma directly, Ogechi offered her own apology for the lies she had spun. Boma admitted his own faults, leading her to confess her love, while reminding him that love is empty without trust. Boma nodded in understanding, expressing his willingness to rebuild that trust step by step, without any pressure. Ogechi agreed that she too needed to earn his trust after her unfair test. For the first time since their secrets were shattered, they shared a look of pure vulnerability. Observing them, Chief Anakim realized this bond transcended corporate mergers and family legacy. It was clear that Ogechi was finally leading with her heart, but she was doing so with her eyes wide open. Boma stepped slightly closer, asking how they should proceed, and she replied with a simple promise to stop hiding behind masks. No more lies, they agreed. In the background, Mama Ngozi grumbled about her opinion being sidelined, but Amaka jokingly chimed in that her auntie had already provided enough commentary to last 10 lifetimes. Hand in hand, Ogechi and Boma walked out into the cool evening air. It was far from a perfect resolution, but they were finally moving in the right direction. Though gossip, anger, and lingering shame still hung over them, they were finally walking as their true selves. No longer pretending to be a wealthy lady named Chioma or a lowly security guard, they recognized they had both been living in carefully crafted lies. However, a new storm was brewing quickly. Femi, hearing that Chief Anakim had welcomed Boma's apology, grew incredibly desperate. He had hoped the scandal would drive Ogechi into his arms, but instead it brought her closer to Boma. In his panic, Femi decided to accelerate his covert scheme to infiltrate the family business. By using a connection with a junior finance officer, Femi had been fishing for sensitive data regarding Chief Anakim's contracts and corporate accounts. His ultimate goal was to secure Ogechi's hand as a golden key to boundless wealth and executive power. Little did he know, 3 vigilant pairs of eyes were tracking his every move from the shadows. Amaka, whose suspicion of Femi had never wavered, was the first to gather proof. After confronting Kemi once more, she uncovered the shocking truth of Femi's plan to actively sabotage the family's business interests from within. You and I can see the sheer greed in Femi's plan to position himself as the respectable savior once Aluchi was disgraced. Kemi tearfully insisted she had no idea he was targeting the business, and Amaka, believing her, secured all the evidence. Meanwhile, Musa was also on high alert. He spotted Femi exchanging a thick brown file for a mysterious envelope with one of Chief Anakim's employees and immediately recorded the shady deal. The final piece of the puzzle fell to Yakubu, the hotel's sharp security chief, who kept a watchful eye on everyone entering. Ever since that disastrous blind date night, Yakubu had been keeping a close eye on Femi's suspicious movements. He recalled Kemi asking odd questions and Femi lingering outside with her after obtaining a package from hotel staff, noting that men who smile too much are usually the most dangerous. Armed with Yakubu's footage, Musa's video, and Kemi's messages, Amaka presented the damning evidence to Ogechi. A chill ran down Ogechi's spine as the gravity of Femi's malice became clear. Realizing they had to act fast, they decided to take the digital evidence straight to Chief Anakim. Urging her father to look at the evidence, Ogechi handed over the drive, prompting Chief Anakim to immediately summon Mr. Okafor to his study. He praised his daughter's vigilance and ordered a quiet, exhaustive audit of every single transaction and contract Femi had touched. By the very next day, the investigation unearthed even worse betrayals. Femi had been manipulating files through a corrupt junior staff member to hijack a private investment deal. He had forged documents to make it look like the chief approved of his schemes, intending to use the marriage to force the deal through. With 8 forged files and 2 unauthorized approvals laid out before him, Chief Anakim felt a deep sense of shame and anger. He realized he had almost let a wolf into his home, simply because the predator wore a tailored suit and a polite smile. When Femi was summoned to the residence, He arrived with his usual smooth greeting, only to be met by a wall of cold fury. Femi tried to spin a desperate lie about people tarnishing his name out of jealousy, but Ogechi stepped forward, cutting him off with the cold truth that he only ever cared about what he could steal from them. You and I can see the sheer desperation in Femi's eyes as he pleaded with Ogechi, his voice cracking while his secret plans were laid bare. He desperately tried to deny the footage, claiming that marrying into her family would grant him the access he needed to exploit her father's obsession with public image. But the truth was undeniable, captured clearly on the hotel security cameras. Chief Anukum stood tall, his heart heavy with betrayal, as he looked at the young man he had welcomed into his home. Without hesitation, the chief ordered the financial crimes officers waiting outside to arrest him. Femi was led away in handcuffs, his schemes ruined, marking the absolute end of his presence in Ogechi's life. As night fell over the estate, Chief Anukum quietly asked Ogechi to join him in his private study. He took a deep breath, looking at his daughter with eyes softened by regret. He admitted his mistakes, confessing that his desire to protect her had crossed the line into control. When Femi had arrived with his polished manners and serious demeanor, the chief had almost fallen for the trap, nearly pushing his precious daughter toward a predator. Ogechi listened, her heart aching, as she gently reminded him that protection without listening is just another form of cage. Her father nodded, admitting that his pride had built a home with walls too thick to let real love through. The heavy walls of pride that Chief Anukum had built around his daughter finally began to crumble. Meanwhile, over at the Nuosu residence, Boma's parents were undergoing their own quiet transformation. Chief Nuosu was deeply embarrassed by the public scandal, yet he could not ignore the profound maturity both Boma and Ogechi had shown through the ordeal. His wife, Mrs. Nuosu, sat in uncharacteristic silence before finally calling Boma to her side. She confessed her prejudice, admitting she had judged Ogechi harshly when she believed her to be a mere cleaner. Boma gently corrected her, explaining that the true lesson was not about Ogechi's real status, but that every human being deserves dignity, regardless of wealth. A heavy sigh escaped Mrs. Nuosu as she looked at her son, finally offering a sincere apology for her blindness. Boma felt a wave of relief wash over him, grateful that his mother was finally beginning to understand his perspective. With the weight of family expectations lifted, Ogechi and Boma decided to hit the reset button on their relationship. No more scratchy security uniforms, no more cleaner aprons, and absolutely no more dramatic family plays. They began going on simple, quiet dates to get to know each other for real. During one of these quiet evenings, Boma admitted how rare it was to find someone who loved him for who he was, rather than the wealthy Nuosu name he carried. Knowing each other's true identities changed everything, allowing them to finally build a real foundation. They were no longer the two lost souls pretending to be someone else. They were finally home. Boma smiled warmly at Ogechi, expressing how a simple roadside date felt infinitely better than any five-star restaurant. He knew without a doubt that she would have stood by his side even if he were just a poor security guard, not a wealthy heir. It was a rare, beautiful certainty in a world full of opportunists. Both of them had spent their entire lives waiting for someone who wanted the actual person inside, rather than the material things they could easily offer. Finding someone who truly wanted the man beneath the prestigious family name was all Boma had ever wanted. As their quiet date drew to a close, he softly confessed to Ogechi how perfect the evening had been, and she shared his reluctance to say goodbye. A few days later, Boma invited her out again, but this time to a very special, humble location. He took her to the exact same roadside spot where they had shared a simple drink when she was still pretending to be Kaima, the cleaner. Looking around the bustling street, Ogechi laughed softly, touched by the sweet gesture. He took her hands, reminding her of how their story began in a web of elaborate lies. Despite the masks they wore, Boma had fallen deeply in love with the genuine soul behind Ogechi's disguise. He loved her quiet kindness, her fierce courage, and even her stubborn streak that occasionally gave him headaches. He told her plainly that he did not care about a picture-perfect romance. He only wanted a completely honest one. He was tired of the endless testing and the heavy walls of suspicion, desiring a future built on pure trust. Looking deeply into her eyes, he asked her to marry him, wanting her simply as she was, without any titles or family names. Tears of joy spilled over her cheeks as she whispered a breathless yes. If we look closely at this moment, we can see the heavy chains of deception finally falling away forever. Their engagement party was a joyful celebration, completely free from the pressure of forced contracts or family deals. While both families attended, the parents had finally learned to step back, offering genuine support instead of demanding obedience. Chief Anukum watched his daughter glide through the room, her laughter light and real. He realized she no longer looked like a prisoner of her own high status. Guests raised their glasses high in the beautifully decorated hall, showering the radiant couple with warm wishes for a brilliant future together. Moose's laughter bounced off the walls, clearly making him the happiest man in the entire venue. He jokingly reminded everyone that he had tasted the life of a billionaire's son for a single day, even if it was a hilarious mistake. Nearby, Yakubu chuckled warmly as he shook Boma's hand, teasing him about being the most handsome imposter guard he had ever encountered. Meanwhile, Mama Ngozi was busy dabbing her teary eyes, loudly claiming she always knew true love would prevail. The entire room collectively stared at her, well aware that her constant scheming had caused most of the chaos in the first place, but she simply sniffled and insisted that love had won in the end. Before the music faded and the night drew to a close, Kemi approached Ogechi with a quiet, humbled demeanor. The sharp edges of her pride had softened, and with a heavy heart, she offered a genuine apology for the pain she had caused. Ogechi acknowledged her sister's betrayal, but chose the path of grace. She made it clear that while forgiveness was freely given, real change was required going forward. When their wedding day finally arrived, it was a beautifully simple affair. Ogechi and Boma stood together at the altar, free from corporate arrangements, fully choosing each other as partners for life. Standing before the quiet gathering, Boma looked directly into Ogechi's eyes and delivered his vows with a steady, emotional voice. He promised her absolute honesty, promising to listen to her thoughts and dreams above the noise of the world. He vowed that he would actively choose her as his partner through every single sunrise and sunset, making her his priority through all of life's unpredictable trials and triumphs. Every word resonated deeply in the silent room, cementing a lifetime promise built on truth rather than family duty. When it was her turn to speak, Ogechi held Boma's hands tightly, her voice filled with a quiet but fierce determination. She promised to match his vulnerability with her own, offering him a life completely free of secrets and pretense. She vowed to always listen to his heart, to support his dreams, and to choose him above all others every single day. The guests watched in silence, deeply moved by the simple power of their exchange. There were no flashy promises of wealth or status, just two souls committing to walk side by side through whatever the future might bring. Following their beautiful ceremony, the newlywed couple made a decision that caught their wealthy social circles completely off guard. Across both of their family enterprises, they established a groundbreaking welfare initiative aimed at protecting the dignity of the unsung workers. They focused on cleaners, security guards, drivers, and office assistants, the very people who kept the businesses running but were so often ignored. This was no mere public relations stunt. Ogechi and Boma personally visited the offices, sat down with the staff, and created safe, direct channels to resolve issues like unpaid wages and workplace bullying. During their regular visits, the workers slowly began to open up, sharing stories of daily disrespect and systemic issues. A cleaner quietly complained about managers stepping on freshly mopped floors without a single word of apology, while a driver mentioned that salaries were often delayed without explanation. Boma listened intently, firmly promising that the mistreatment and administrative delays would end immediately. Ogechi checked on an elderly security guard, asking about his back pain, and smiling warmly when he thanked her for the orthopedic chair she had ordered. Step by step, they began to rebuild a culture of mutual respect. You and I can see the profound impact of their past struggles in every small gesture, like when Ogechi brought a refreshing bottle of Zobo to Helen, the office receptionist, asking warmly about her son's education. Neither Ogechi nor Boma could ever forget what it felt like to be completely invisible, treated as mere scenery in the lives of the wealthy. They had learned the hard way that true kindness is measured when there is absolutely nothing to gain. It is effortless to bow before power and wealth, but a person's real character is revealed by how they treat those who can offer nothing in return, those who have no voice to defend themselves. As the years quietly rolled by, their lives settled into a beautiful, hard-earned peace, far from the chaotic drama of their youth. In the end, you and I are left with the beautiful truth of how their love began, hidden behind borrowed names and elaborate pretenses. They had once believed that love was a towering fortress built brick by brick, but they discovered it was actually an open window, letting the fresh air of truth inside. Their story started in a web of clever lies, but it ultimately survived and flourished because they had the courage to shed their masks, choose absolute honesty, and build a real home together.